For 2,000 years, we have read 4 words as a rejection. Do not touch me. A risen Christ, standing in a garden at dawn, telling the woman who loved him most not to come near. It sounds cold. It sounds like a door quietly closing. For centuries, sincere believers have wondered why the gentlest man who ever lived would push away a broken woman at her lowest moment. But what if it was never a rejection at all? What if those 4 words were actually a promise? I'll be honest with you. For a long time, this line felt distant to me too, like a wall I was not allowed to climb. I've spent years now reading the scriptures in their original languages, not as a scholar behind a desk, but as someone who needed the voice of Jesus to hold me together when everything else came apart. So when I tell you there is good news buried in this verse, I am not handing you a theory. I am handing you something that changed the way I see God. And to see it clearly, we only need 3 things. The Greek word hiding underneath the English, the exact morning Jesus said it, and what all of it means for your own life, right now. If this verse has ever felt like a closed door to you, do something for me. Type 1 word in the comments, listening, so I know you are walking through this with me. Hold on to that word. We will come back to it at the very end. So let's go back to the garden, back to the moment when everything seems to go wrong, and a grieving woman reaches for the one thing she thought she had lost forever. The first thing we have to do is stand where Mary stood, because you cannot understand these words until you feel the ground they were spoken on. It is early on the first day of the week, and the sky over Jerusalem has not yet decided whether it is morning. Mist still clings to the broken stone. A woman is on her knees in the half-dark, and she is breaking. In her hands she carries jars of sweet spices, the last gift love is allowed to give the dead. She has not come to celebrate. She has not come expecting a miracle. She has come to finish grieving. You need to know who this woman is, because it changes everything. Her name was Mary, from a small fishing town called Magdala. The Gospels tell us that 7 spirits had once tormented her, and that Jesus set her free. After that, she did not simply admire him from a distance. She followed him. She helped carry his ministry. She stood close enough to the cross to hear the breath leave his body, while others watched from far away, if they watched at all. When everyone else ran, she stayed. So, when the Sabbath ended, she went to the tomb, not with hope, but with grief. And when she arrived, the math stopped working. The stone was rolled away. The tomb was open. The body was gone. John, in chapter 20, verse 1, records it with a quiet precision. Early, while it was still dark, she came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away. Notice what she does not think. She does not think resurrection. She runs to the disciples and says, "They have taken the Lord, and we do not know where they have laid him." That is not the language of a woman waiting for a miracle. That is a woman who believes the cruelty of the cross has followed her into the grave, that someone has stolen the last thing she had left of him. Peter and John come, they look, and they leave. But Mary cannot leave. John, chapter 20, verse 11, says, "She stood outside the tomb, weeping." While others move on, she stays in the place where the loss is heaviest, because when love runs deep, grief does not let go quickly. And it is here, in this exact moment of collapse, that the risen Jesus speaks her name, and everything in her turns toward him. She reaches out, she takes hold of him, and then he says the words that have unsettled readers for 2,000 years. "Do not touch me." John, chapter 20, verse 17. Feel how that lands. A woman who lost him once, who watched him die, who came back through a dangerous city in the dark just to be near his body, finally has him in front of her, alive, and the first thing he seems to say is, "Not you, not now, do not come near." If you have ever loved God and still felt held at arm's length, you know why this verse can wound. For many sincere believers, these 4 words have quietly felt like a verdict, proof that even at the highest moment, they were being pushed away. But before we accept that reading, before we let it become a scar, we have to be honest about something. The usual explanations for why Jesus said this simply do not hold up. And the moment you test them, they fall apart one by one. So, let's do the honest thing. and start with the explanations you have probably already heard, because getting this wrong has quietly wounded a lot of sincere people. The first common answer is that the body of the risen Jesus had become something fragile or too holy to be touched, as if he were made of light, glowing with a glory so pure that human hands would be burned by it. It is a beautiful idea. It is also impossible, because only a few days later, in this very same gospel, Jesus stands in front of a doubting disciple named Thomas and does the exact opposite. He says, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." John, chapter 20, verse 27. He does not warn Thomas to keep his distance. He invites the touch. He offers his wounds to be handled. A body too holy to be touched does not say, "Come and put your hand inside me." The second answer is that this was about ritual purity, some technical rule that made Jesus untouchable in that moment. But that explanation collapses even faster, because on that very same morning, other women meet the risen Jesus on the road. Matthew chapter 28, verse 9, tells us they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. And Jesus says nothing, no rebuke, no warning. "No, do not touch me." If touching him broke some rule at that hour, then the rule was broken by other women within minutes, and heaven said nothing at all. So now watch what is happening. Within a single week, and even within a single morning, the risen Jesus welcomes being touched by Thomas, allows being held by the other women, and yet tells Mary, "Do not touch me." Same body, same days. 3 completely different responses. If the problem were the touching itself, this would be a contradiction sitting right in the middle of the resurrection. That leaves the third answer, the one that wounds the most. Maybe it was personal. Maybe Jesus was putting distance between himself and Mary, cooling something, holding her at arm's length. But look at everything he does after the resurrection, and that reading falls apart too. He seeks people out. He walks miles beside 2 heartbroken travelers on a road. He cooks breakfast on a beach for the very friends who abandoned him. He is not a man withdrawing from the people who love him. If anything, he keeps drawing closer. The risen Jesus is the least distant person in the entire story. So here is where we are. It was not that his body could not be touched. It was not a rule about purity, and it was not rejection. Every easy answer breaks the moment you hold it up to the rest of the Gospels. And maybe you have felt that same frustration in your own faith, reaching for a simple explanation of something God did, only to watch it fall apart in your hands. That is not a reason to stop asking. It is a reason to dig deeper. Because if it was not about touch, and it was not about distance, then Jesus must have been saying something the English translation cannot quite carry. Something the disciples who first wrote this down heard clearly, but that gets lost the moment we read it in our own language. And to hear it the way Mary heard it, we have to go underneath the English, down to a single Greek word. This is the key most people skip right past, and it is our third step, moving from the scene, past the wrong answers, and down into the language itself. When John wrote this gospel, he did not write it in English. He wrote it in Greek, the language Mary and the disciples actually lived in. And the phrase we translate as, "do not touch me," is 3 small Greek words, me, mo, haptu. Hold those words for a moment, because everything turns on the middle of them. The important one is haptu. It comes from the Greek verb haptomai, and here is the first surprise. Haptomai does not mean a light, gentle touch. It is not the word you would use for brushing someone's arm as you pass. It means to take hold of, to fasten onto, to grip, to cling. It is the word for grabbing something and refusing to let go. So already the English is too soft. Jesus is not responding to a fingertip. He is responding to a grip. Now here is the second surprise, and this is the part that quietly changes the entire verse. In Greek, verbs carry a tense and a mood that tell you not just what is happening, but how. And haptu is in a form called the present imperative. When that form is used with a command to stop, it does not mean do not start something. It means stop something that is already in progress. It is the difference between saying do not touch that to a child who has not moved yet and saying let go of that to a child who is already holding on. So put it back together. Mary has already reached him. She has already taken hold. Her hands are already wrapped around him, the way you grab someone you were terrified you had lost forever. And into that grip, Jesus says, do not touch me, but something much closer to, stop clinging to me, stop holding on. You do not have to grab me like this, as if I am about to be taken from you again. Feel how different that is. The English sounds like a man stepping back. The Greek sounds like a man gently loosening the hands of someone who is holding on out of fear. One is rejection, the other is reassurance. And watch what this does to the contradiction we found earlier. Suddenly, it is not a contradiction at all. Mary was clinging, gripping, refusing to let go. So Jesus says, stop holding on. The other women fell down and worshipped at his feet, a posture of surrender, not of grasping. So there was nothing to correct. And Thomas was not clinging either. Thomas was doubting. So Jesus offered his wounds as proof. 3 people, 3 completely different postures toward the same risen body. Not a contradiction, but 3 different needs, each answered exactly the way that moment required. And if we are honest, we know Mary's posture from the inside, because this is what we do with the things we love and are afraid to lose. We do not just hold them, we clutch them. We grip a season, a relationship, a version of our own life, a feeling of God being near, and we squeeze as if holding tighter could keep it from ever changing. Mary's hands in that garden are our hands. So the wound begins to heal. He was not pushing her away, he was steadying her. He was saying, you can stop bracing for another loss. But that still leaves the sharpest question of all. If it only meant, stop clinging, why did it have to be said right then? Why could this one embrace not last another minute? What was so urgent on that specific morning that even love had to loosen its grip? Because the answer is not about Mary at all. It is about where Jesus was standing in time. This is the part almost no one connects to this moment, and it is our 4th key, the one that turns a gentle correction into something breathtaking. Look again at the full sentence. Jesus does not simply say, stop clinging to me. He gives a reason. Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. John, chapter 20, verse 17. That little word, for, is doing enormous work. He is saying, there is a reason you cannot hold me here right now, and the reason is that something is already happening. I am in the middle of it. I am on my way somewhere, and this cannot wait. To feel the weight of that, we have to go back more than 1,000 years before that morning, into an old law that most readers never link to the garden. In the law God gave Israel, there was a quiet, almost forgotten festival called the Feast of First Fruits. And the instruction was strange. When the harvest first began to ripen, the people were not allowed to rush in and start eating, not one grain. First, they had to cut the very first sheaf, the first stalks of grain to ripen, and bring it to the priest. And the priest would lift it and wave it before the Lord, presenting it to God on the people's behalf. Here is the detail that should make you sit up. No one was permitted to eat from the new harvest, not a single handful, until that first sheaf had been lifted and accepted before God. The harvest belonged to God first. It could not be touched, or claimed, or used by anyone, until it had first been presented to him, and the law was specific about the timing. Leviticus, chapter 23, says this offering had to happen on the morrow after the Sabbath, the day right after the weekly day of rest. Now, hold that beside the resurrection. Jesus was crucified at Passover. He rested in the tomb through the Sabbath. And he rose on the first day of the week, the morning right after the Sabbath, the exact day the law had marked out for the first sheaf to be lifted, more than 1,000 years in advance. That is not a coincidence the early church missed. The Apostle Paul says it directly, but now is Christ risen from the dead and become the firstfruits of them that slept. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 20. Not like the firstfruits. The firstfruits, the very sheaf the whole law had been pointing toward. So now stand back in the garden and see what is actually happening. On the exact morning, the sacred calendar called for the first sheaf of the harvest to be lifted and presented to God, before anyone was allowed to touch it. The risen Christ, the true first fruits of the dead, is standing in a garden with a grieving woman's hands wrapped around him, trying to keep him on the earth a little longer. Do you see it now? Mary was not just hugging a friend. Without knowing it, she was reaching for the harvest before it had been lifted before God. And the priest in this picture was Jesus himself, about to present his own risen life to the Father, so that everything the resurrection had won could be accepted on our behalf. It is like grabbing the high priest by the robe in the middle of the most sacred moment of the year and saying, "Do not go in yet, stay here with me." Not because the love was wrong, but because something far larger was already in motion. That is why it could not wait. Not for lack of love, but because 1,000 years of promise were being fulfilled in real time in an ordinary garden at dawn, and Mary had accidentally reached into the middle of it. And here is what that means for the wound we started with. His words were never slamming a door. They were the sound of a door being opened, the moment the harvest is presented, so that everyone else can finally come and share in it. Which changes the whole meaning of what he says next. Now the meaning becomes personal, and this is our fifth key, where the whole verse finally turns from wound into gift. Because once you see the first fruits, you realize Jesus was not saying no to Mary. He was saying, "Not like this, not this small. Do not try to hold me the way you held me before. As a body you can keep in one garden, on one morning, all to yourself. Because I am about to become something you could never have imagined, closer to you than these arms could ever be." Think about what Mary actually wanted in that moment. She wanted the old thing back. She wanted the teacher she had followed on the dusty roads, the friend she could see and hear and reach out and touch, exactly as it was before the cross. That is what she was gripping. Not too much love, too small a hope. She was trying to press the risen Christ back into the size of her memories, and Jesus loved her too much to let her settle for that. Because if he stayed on earth, walking one road at a time, he could only ever be in one place, with one group of people, at one moment. You could travel to him, you could wait in line for him, but you could not have him with you, always, everywhere, inside your own heart. That is the promise hidden inside. Stop clinging to me. He had told the disciples this was coming. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is better for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. John chapter 16, verse 7. Read those words slowly. It is better for you that I go away. He is saying, there is a near stock can only give you if you stop clinging to the nearness you already have. This is the difference between holding a candle and being given the sun. Mary was clutching a single flame, precious, warm, but small, and afraid of the dark that might come if it went out. And Jesus was saying, let go of the candle, because I am about to fill the whole sky. The presence you are gripping is real, but it is the smaller gift. Do not trade the Spirit poured into every believer, in every country, in every century, for one more minute of an embrace in a garden. So, do not touch me was never rejection. It was the opposite. It was a promise of a closeness so total that letting go was the only way to receive it. And then watch what Jesus does with her hands. He does not just ask Mary to release him. He fills her empty hands with something to carry. In the same breath, he says, go to my brothers and tell them. John chapter 20, verse 17. He turns her grief into a mission. He turns the woman clinging in the garden into the first person ever sent to announce that Jesus is alive. And you must not miss how staggering that is. In that world, a woman's testimony was often considered worthless, not even allowed to count as evidence in a court. And yet, the risen Christ chooses a woman, this woman, with her history, with her tears still wet, to be the very first witness of the resurrection. The early church would later call her the apostle to the apostles, the one sent to the ones who would be sent. The men were still hiding behind locked doors. She was already running with the news. Do you see the exchange? She wanted to hold on to him. He wanted to send her out with him. She reached for the past. He handed her the future. and the moment she stopped clinging was the exact moment she became a witness. Letting go was not loss. Letting go was how she was commissioned. That is what he offers every one of us in this verse. Not, keep your distance, but open your hands, because I have something bigger to put in them, and somewhere I am sending you to carry it. And if that was true for Mary, standing in the garden with the whole plan of God turning around her, then the only honest question left is what it means for your own hands, in your own life, this week. Because this word was never meant to stay in that garden. So now let this leave the garden, and this is our sixth and final movement, where the word Jesus spoke to Mary becomes a word spoken to you, because you have a grip too. We all do. There is something in your hands right now that you are holding the way Mary held him, with your knuckles white, terrified that if you loosen your fingers even a little, you will lose it forever. Maybe it is a season of your life that has already ended, but you keep reaching back for it, the way things used to feel when your faith was new, when God seemed loud, when everything was simpler. And you keep trying to recreate that old feeling, not realizing that God may be trying to lead you into something deeper, something that will not fit inside the old shape. Maybe it is a relationship you are gripping out of fear, holding on so tightly that you are slowly crushing the very thing you are afraid to lose. Maybe it is a plan for your life you have clutched for years, a picture of how it was all supposed to go. Or maybe it is a version of yourself, or a version of your faith that felt safe once, but that you have quietly outgrown. And here is the quiet, holy truth underneath all of it. Sometimes the thing you are clinging to is not a bad thing at all. Sometimes, like Mary, you are clinging to something genuinely good. That is what makes it so hard to release. But remember the first fruits. The first and best part had to be lifted up and given to God before the rest of the harvest could be received. God was never trying to take the harvest away. He was asking for it to be open to him first, so that he could give it back, multiplied and holy and free. That is the pattern of everything God does. He does not ask you to let go so that your hands stay empty. He asks you to let go so that he can fill them with something greater than what you were gripping. The open hand is not the hand of loss. It is the only hand that can receive. So hear the risen Christ say it gently over your own life. Stop clinging, not because what you hold does not matter, but because I have something larger, and you cannot carry it with your fists closed. And then remember how Mary's story ends, because it tells you what is on the other side of letting go. She came to that garden to do one last sad thing for a dead man. She came to anoint a body, to say goodbye, to close the door on the best thing that had ever happened to her. That is all she expected, grief and then an empty walk home. But she did not go home holding spices for a corpse. She went running, with a living message on her lips, into the rest of her life. The hands that came to cling to a body were sent out to carry the greatest news the world has ever heard. She let go of the smaller thing, and God placed something eternal in its place. That is what he is offering you in these 3 words. Not a door closing in your face, but a hand reaching for yours, asking you to trust him enough to open it. Because everything he asks you to release, he only ever asks so that he can give you back more of himself. So the real question this verse leaves in your hands is simple, and it is deeply personal. What are you still clinging to that Jesus is lovingly asking you to release so that he can give you the greater thing he has been holding for you all along? So we come back to where we began, to 4 words that sounded so cold. Do not touch me. And now you can hear them for what they always were. Not a door slammed in a grieving woman's face, but a promise whispered over her. You cannot keep me small enough to hold, because I am about to be with you everywhere and forever. Remember the woman who came to that garden. She arrived carrying spices for a corpse, and she left carrying the greatest news the world had ever heard. The hands that reached out to cling were opened, and then they were filled, and then they were sent. That is what the risen Christ does with everyone who trusts him. He does not take and leave you empty. He asks you to open your hands so he can give you more of himself. And he never asks you to let go of anything he was not willing to let go of first. So before you go, let me ask you to do 3 small things. At the very start, I asked you to type the word listening. If this changed the way you see this verse, type one more word now, sent, because that is what this morning turns grief into. If it stirred something in you, leave a like, so it can reach someone who is still reading these words as rejection. And if you want to keep walking through the scriptures like this, one verse at a time, subscribe and stay with me. And now, as you go, receive this blessing. May the God who called Mary by name in the garden call you by yours. May you have the courage to open your hands to him. May you trust him with the very thing you have been most afraid to release. And may the risen Christ, who is closer to you now than any embrace, fill you with a peace the world cannot take away, today and all your days. Go in peace, and go tell somebody what you have seen.